Well, welcome all to this first session of the day. Thank you. If you could take your seats in silence, it would be terrific. When you're ready. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Welcome to this first session of the day, our Ministerial Forum on Forest Finance. Now, I don't know about you, but I get a little bit annoyed when I hear about the failure of the forest climate agenda, about the failure of REDD+ to deliver on its promise of a decade and more ago. Because the promise of REDD+, the promise of bringing forests productively into the climate agenda, was predicated upon large, sustainable, predictable, long-term flows of finance from developed countries, primarily, to forest countries, primarily developing or middle-income countries. And that long-term, large, sustainable, predictable flow of forest finance to the tune of tens of billions of dollars a year, which was our original conception a decade and more ago, that flow of finance has not happened. So it is not surprising that progress on the forest climate agenda has been so much less than all of us hoped. This is the critical issue in the forest climate agenda. We will not bring forests productively into the climate agenda unless we get that large, predictable, sustainable, long-term flow of finance. So I'm delighted that we've devoted this high-level session to the issue with distinguished politicians and officials to speak for us on it. And with that, I call on our first speaker, Maria Elena Semedo, who is a Deputy Director General of the FAO. Thank you, Maria Elena.
I'm not so tall like this. Good morning to all. Excellencies, ministers, deputy ministers, Green Climate Fund CEO, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, dear participants. It is my pleasure to co-host and welcome you all to this Ministerial Forum on Forest Finance. Today's environmental and health crisis and the global fallout from conflicts call for urgent action for a sustainable recovery. Forests can play a key role in this sustainable recovery. Healthy and thriving forests can help the world address the climate crisis. They are critical to building back better and greener from the pandemic, to which FAO and partners are fully committed. They are essential to more diverse and resilient agri-food system that can better withstand global shocks. But to protect and unlock the full contribution of forests to economies and human well-being, we need to recognize the full value and invest in their sustainability. Around half of the world's GDP moderately or highly depends on ecosystem services, including those provided by forests. However, forests are still being lost at a rate of 10 million hectares per year, severely undermining efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. To reverse this trend, we need to divert financial flows away from action that harm forests. Instead, we must incentivize investment in conservation, restoration, and sustainable use. We must address trade-offs and maximize synergies between agri-food systems and forests. By doing so, we can help to produce sufficient, safe, and healthy food for a growing population while conserving our natural resources and biodiversity. To achieve this, we must mainstream forestry as part of national accounting and with fiscal and financial policies. Forest finance needs at least triple by 2030 to meet climate, biodiversity, and land degradation neutrality targets. Viable options exist. Climate action, United Nations REDD+, and forest restoration, in particular, have advanced in recent years. Implementation and finance are scaling up. REDD+ and other related results-based payment schemes could play a key role in supporting countries to halt deforestation, promote restoration, and enhance sustainable use of forests. We can take advantage of growing carbon markets, seize promising developments in mobilizing private sector finance, and make sure that finance reaches small-scale producers. But finance needs to be matched with political will, strong institutions, technical knowledge, bold policies, and support. Ladies and gentlemen, we must promote win-win solutions for increased sustainable production while halting deforestation. How this can be achieved? This can be achieved through creating national policies that promote local markets for sustainable products, pursuing a green, inclusive, and circular bioeconomy, repurposing agriculture subsidies. Currently, almost 540 billion per year to include forestry and agroforestry. Setting clear national targets for sustainable agriculture development and forest conservation and sustainable use. Securing land tenure and land heights. Implementing market-based measures to improve the sustainability of agri-food system, and increasing transparency and rewarding progress in target supply chains. These actions sit at the intersection of finance, economy, and rural development, both at national and international levels. The Food and Agriculture Organization is committed to working with member countries and financing partners to address the challenge facing forests. Challenge we can address through science and innovation, and knowledge and capacity development. Across agri-food systems, forest management, and rural development. The countries and organizations represented here play a central role in advancing many needed actions. No doubt, they will provide valuable insights into the roadmap to scale up efforts and raise ambitions. I wanted to express our appreciation to the two Korea-based institutions, the Global Green Growth Institute and the Green Climate Fund, for their contribution to the forum. Our thanks also go to the government of Korea, a country that holds a special role as a hub for innovation and sustainable investment. And finally, I wish to thank our UN head colleagues for their support in organizing this forum. Together, we can protect and restore forests and their products and services, so they can play a key role in better production, better nutrition, better environment, and a better life for all. I wish you a successful event, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Maria Elena. May I now call upon the Minister for Economy and Finance of the Government of Korea, Mr. Dog-Yel Ahn.
Good morning. As have been introduced, I am An Do-gol, Vice Minister of Economy and Planning at the Republic of Korea. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Minister Choi Byung-am and also Deputy Director General Maria Helena Semedo for this invitation to the Ministerial Forum on Forest Finance at the World Forestry Congress, the most influential international conference in the area of forestry. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Secretary General GCF and Secretary General of GGGI for participating in this forum. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us today. Thank you to all of the ministers and vice ministers as well. Also, a special thank you to all those who have made this event possible. In order to respond to climate change, one of the most important topics is indeed forest finance, and I believe that it is very meaningful that the first topic of this year's Congress's Ministerial Forum is on forest finance. This April, IPCC issued a report which says that the pace of climate change has accelerated by 10 years compared to the 2018 predictions. In order to respond to climate change, we need to come up with nature-based solutions, including forestry. The forests on Earth are equivalent to the lungs of our body, and forestry is indeed the vaccine that can help us protect ourselves from climate change. Forestry is also being recognized as a UN as carbon sinks. At the 2020 Davos Forum, a major agenda to plant 1 trillion trees around the world was also received a lot of attention. At last year's COP26, through the Glasgow Declaration on Forest and Land Use, along with 140 countries, the Republic of Korea has declared that we will stop the depletion of forestry and land. The Republic of Korea has invested 1.6 trillion won as of 2010 to reforest our nation, and we have expanded this budget to 2.4 trillion as of 2022. And as a result, just 5 decades ago, most of our forests were depleted. However, we have now become a forestry powerhouse because tree coverage in Korea is 65% of our total territory. Against such a backdrop, we have the honor and privilege of hosting this year's World Forestry Congress. Last year, The Republic of Korea hosted the P4G Seoul Summit, and we also participated in COP26. And against this backdrop, we have established the Green New Deal Trust Fund and have pledged to contribute 30 trillion won over the next 5 years. We will be actively expanding budgets to fight against climate change. Our ODA budget records 4 trillion won this year, and not only will we be contributing to the socio-economic development of emerging nations, we will also be expanding our development cooperation programs on various fronts. Against the backdrop of our successful experience in greening our nation, we will also continue to expand efforts to share our forestry restoration experience through ODA so that we can continue to create forestry across the world and also produce and consume the value of forestry through a circular economy. We hope to participate in expanding programs to enhance income for local communities, capacity building for women and youth, and also to have donor and beneficiary collaboration organizations. Especially through GCF and GGGI, we will continue to stand up to global challenges such as disasters and climate change, and we will continue to support and finance cross-global efforts to fight against climate change. And also by establishing the Climate Technology Center and Network, we have continued to expand various cooperation for the field of green technologies. I look forward to the various messages of the speakers present at this forum today to once again emphasize the vision of forestry for the international community and also to come up with actionable and tangible measures. I look forward to all of you participating in building a green, healthy, and resilient future with forests. At the 15th World Forestry Congress, I look forward to cooperative measures being found to expand forest finance. I would like to take this opportunity to once again thank our speakers and panelists for your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice Minister Ahn. And I'd now like to draw your attention to a video, if we could have it shown on the screen. A submission by the Minister for International Environment and Climate of the UK, Zach Goldsmith.
It's a pleasure to say a few words. Put simply, if we lose the world's great forest, or even much more of them, we will have derailed those complex natural systems on which each of us depends for everything, from food, clean air, rainfall, to the very stability of the climate that makes life possible for us. It's the height of madness, the definition of irresponsibility. And although, of course, there is so much more to discover and learn, we don't need any more research to tell us what we need to do. But the good news is that we know we can. We have all the tools we need. There are pockets of real ambition around the world, including here in South Korea. And we know that given half a chance, nature can and does recover. Indeed, the beauty of protecting and restoring the natural world is that in doing so, we're tackling so many other challenges as well, the causes and impacts of climate change, hunger, poverty, pollution, even pandemics. And that's why, as COP26 presidents, the UK brought nature from the margins of the global climate debate into the heart of our response, with 141 countries committing to work together to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by the end of this decade. Unprecedented financial commitments amounting to around $20 billion, including an initial $1.7 billion to help indigenous peoples and local communities secure land rights, and commitments from the world's biggest buyers of forest risk commodities, financial institutions, and the big multilateral development banks that will see trillions of dollars aligned with our goals. Now, in the months before we hand over to our friends in Egypt and beyond, our priority, our responsibility, is to ensure those commitments are honored in full and that we build upon them. But COP27 is just one landing post this year. We have numerous opportunities to build on that momentum at the CBD COP15 in Kunming, and before then at the UNCCD COP15. And the golden thread running through all three Rio conventions is, of course, nature and our relationship with the natural world. This event is about finance, and it's key. If we want to secure an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework and get it over the line in Kunming, we need to demonstrate a seriousness about closing the huge funding gap over the course of the next decade. Public money, private money, philanthropic money, all need to scale up. And for our part in the UK, we have doubled our international climate finance to £11.6 billion, and we've committed to investing at least £3 billion of that on nature-based solutions. We'll spend at least half of that on forests. But we also need to change the way public money is spent right across the board. So instead of undermining and degrading the public good, it supports it, shifting hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies away from destruction and towards sustainability, resilience, renewal. The world's top 50 food-producing countries, for example, spend around $700 billion every year subsidizing often devastating land use. That's 4 times the world's aid budgets combined, and it's roughly what we think we're going to need to help nature recover. So you only need to imagine what we could achieve together for forests, for nature, if we got that money flowing in the right direction. We need to commit to making all official development assistance, or ODA, nature positive and Paris aligned. And we need governments to commit to using all those levers that are uniquely at their disposal, working together across the ministries of government to adjust the rules, adjusting them so that we take nature into account in all our decisions, so that we make pollution, degradation, and waste an unbearable liability, and so that the market recognizes the true value of nature. And it is a colossal challenge, even as we confront the impact of conflicts and we work to bring the pandemic to a final end. But it is essential, and we have everything we need to do it, including those inspiring examples around the world of what's needed. So I look forward to continuing to work with all of you and seeing this through in the weeks, months, years ahead. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Big thank you to all our first 3 speakers. Could I now call on the first panel, our first panel of this morning, to come to the stage? Thank you. Thank you very much. Our first 3 panelists, if you could come up to the stage. Very good. Very, very pleased to have with us Minister Byung-am Che of the Korea Forest Service, Her Excellency Rosalie Matondo, who's the Minister of Forest Economy of the Republic of Congo, that's Congo-Brazzaville, and Marcial Amaro Jr., who is the Assistant Secretary of Environment and Tourism of the Philippines. Alas, we could not have with us our 4th intended panelist due to the now wearily familiar COVID reason. But I'm delighted to ask Dr. Frank Rees-Berman, the Director General of the Global Green Growth Institute, to speak to us live on Zoom.
Are you ready for me to start?
Please do begin.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies that I cannot be with you in person, but indeed, as the moderator mentioned, yesterday morning, unfortunately, I got a positive COVID test returned to me, so I had to get into quarantine. But I'm still very happy to speak to you about green climate and carbon finance for sustainable forest management. And if we can start with my first slide, I'll give you some practical examples of the kind of actions that those ministers, those leaders promised us in COP26. Can we start my slides, please? I think that requires an action on the organizer side. Well, while we wait for that to happen, a number of speakers have already mentioned, there we go. So my first slide briefly introduces GGI, as we are still a very young intergovernmental organization, unlike the FAO, your key hosts. We only got established about 10 years ago as an intergovernmental organization supporting our member countries to shift to a greener, more environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive model of economic development. Next slide. We now, next, thank you. We have now 43 member countries and another 20 plus on the road to membership. And what is a little bit special is that we have about 3/4 of our staff embedded in our member countries in ministries of finance, planning, or indeed of environment and forest. We support those countries in their forest policies, their climate policies, but also in mobilizing green and climate finance. So in the next slide, you see that there are quite a few innovative and sustainable financing options that we work on and that we believe are opportunities for countries seeking to raise funding to manage their funding more sustainably. They range from financial instruments that will reduce risk on specific projects and enable capital flows into sustainable forest management. And you can think of green bonds, for example, but also carbon credits or debt for nature or climate swaps or payments for ecosystem services. But in many cases, we hear actually that there is enough money, but what the real shortage is good projects, good bankable projects that are in line with the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement or SDGs. And in some cases, international funding is simply not prepared to deal with small projects in developing countries, and some form of national financing vehicles, funds or facilities or green banks are needed to help direct that financing flow. Let me give you more practical examples of what I'm talking about. Next slide, please. So green bonds in the developed world have risen exponentially in the last several years, but there are much fewer, there is a very limited amount of such green finance flowing to developing countries for the moment. But right now, in the last 1 or 2 years, this is a really hot topic in Latin America and the Caribbean, where on the screen you see a whole host of green bonds, we call them in general, thematic bonds if you want to be more specific, because they include sustainable bonds, green bonds, blue bonds, and other funds of financial instruments that raise funding in general for climate action and sometimes quite specifically for forest projects like in Ecuador and Peru for their equatorial forest on the border, where we are working with the national banks of both countries to issue a green bond specifically to manage their forests. Next slide. In fact, Peru last year issued a very large sustainable and social bond to fund a host of projects, including forest projects with GDGI support. And also, national development banks are key opportunities to issue such new financial instruments. In Mexico, we worked with NAFIN last year, Mexico's second largest development bond. And we are finding that when well prepared, there is ample money. Most of those bonds are oversubscribed. In Vietnam, we're similarly working with the government to prepare for their first green bonds to be issued shortly, both by the government and by the private sector. And while only a few countries in Africa have experimented with such instruments, there is a rapidly growing interest to engage. Next slide. Even newer also agreed at COP26 was the rule book for Article 6. So RED+, the voluntary market for carbon credits related to forests, is likely to move to the more formal Article 6 governed market for internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. Now, most countries are not ready for that yet, but it is a good time to put in place the governance, the MRVs, and the other instruments that selling countries will need to be able to trade with interested countries on the buying side. And we see among our members that almost every member country of GDGI is interested to either sell or buy such carbon credits. In fact, next slide, we are this year exploring in active consultation with our members whether organizations like GDGI, in addition to providing technical support, could potentially set up a carbon transaction platform to become a party to such transactions. And what we have in mind, to give you an example, is that we would help broker a deal between Indonesia, for example, which does now have a presidential decree on carbon transactions, and Korea, very interested in buying such carbon credits. And if the two governments can agree on the terms and conditions, that might open the opportunity for project developers in Indonesia to develop projects that could be offered to, for example, Korean private sector companies interested in buying such credits if they can be validated on the Korean national carbon market. So those are extremely interesting opportunities for forest countries that will, we believe, rapidly grow in the coming years. Next slide. Finally, debt for nature swaps have been around for some time. This is the official definition from the United Nations. Not very well understood in most developing countries, but a debt for nature swap is formally an arrangement by which an indebted developing country, the debtor country, undertakes in exchange for a cancellation of a portion of its foreign debt to establish local currency funds to be used to finance a conservation or climate action program. And this is an opportunity that we believe for quite a few countries that do not have the opportunity to increase their sovereign debt. In fact, it is a form of debt restructuring, if you like, and we are currently working with the government of Senegal, for example, to explore a debt for nature swap that would help conserve mangroves in its coastal area. Next slide. Payment for ecosystem services have been discussed quite a bit in the conference as well. And while they are still very new to many countries, there is quite a bit of experience, particularly in Latin American countries, with setting up funds that can then indeed manage such ecosystem services. Currently, India, for instance, is experimenting with what would be the first time in India to use ecosystem services to restore the landscape in the watershed of the Narmada dams, the Narmada watershed. And I think this is another opportunity that many more developing countries could explore to mobilize funding internally within the country from cities generally that are willing and able to pay for the protection of their watersheds, mostly for the water-related services that the forests provide, but there are others that could be explored as well. Next slide. So another important forest country that GGI works with on a host of financial instruments for sustainable forest landscape management focus particularly on thinking about the forest economy. And there are many sides to that, from indeed payments for ecosystem services to nature-based tourism to making cattle ranching more sustainable. And this is indeed an effective form of mobilizing finance for forests. Next slide. In Colombia, that means that the government has worked with a number of international partners since 2015 to have results-based payments through a joint declaration of intent between Colombia, Germany, Norway, and the UK. Significant funds have been mobilized in a number of tranches, several $100 million initially, since expanded with several more tranches. And in return, Colombia has established a green growth policy, but also a national bioeconomy policy to help deliver the kind of results that have mobilized these payments. A very effective way for Colombia that I believe will be helpful in years to come for an additional number of countries. Next slide. So there are some specific forest-related challenges. For instance, when forest plantations are established, for quite a few years, there are no returns. Banks don't like that. Loans are often refused. So there we are experimenting in Colombia with a form of productive cash flow alignment, which is actually proposed as a venture capital fund that could be capitalized through the Green Climate Fund, another partner in this session, through its local Finagro, that is a fund established in Colombia to support forest and agriculture, if and when it gets its accreditation to the GCF approved. Next slide. The second tricky issue for forests is that many banks still don't accept forest cover as a collateral for financial transactions. And there again, it is possible to establish innovative forest cover guarantees that would make it possible for forest projects to be financed. I'll leave it at that for now, but these are all, I think, exciting, innovative financial instruments for forest products. Next slide. Moving to another important forest country that has many interesting projects in the pipeline, Indonesia, where we're working with government to reduce deforestation and degradation of forests, mangroves and peatlands. Next slide. You'll see that these are examples of bankable projects that have been developed in Indonesia, some of them for funding by the Green Climate Fund, a results-based payment linked to REDD+, for instance, or others through similar instruments at the World Bank, but also some that are able to mobilize private sector investments. Next slide. In fact, with an eye on the Green Climate Fund, who I think will be speaking in this session as well, it is of course a critical fund that many countries find a little bit difficult to access. But on the other hand, the Green Climate Fund says if we only had more high quality projects submitted to us, things would go a lot faster. And in Indonesia, we are working with government to indeed mobilize a larger number of projects that can be submitted to the Green Climate Fund as one of their delivery partners. We do this kind of work in about 30 countries. And while not all of these projects are forest related, many of them are. And I do believe that this is an excellent opportunity for forest countries as well. Next slide. So in terms of results-based payment, quite a few countries have started to develop jurisdictional emission reduction programs, such as the province of East Kalimantan in Indonesia, that has mobilized both funding from the Indonesian government and through a partnership at the World Bank, where about $110 million has been raised for the implementation of these results-based payments. It is a long haul, as you can see in this slide. It has now been approved and is in the implementation stage, but it took quite a few years to develop. Next slide. Finally, let me mention, given that we have Korea Forest Service here as your host, of course, there are also many good projects that can be developed by improving agroforestry value chain, such as the project that KFS is supporting in Ethiopia, part of their Peace Forest initiative, to improve coffee agroforestry, starting with farmers and moving all the way to value chains that reach the coffee shops in Korea with improved and high-value coffee beans. Next slide. And indeed, those opportunities are there in many countries. We're working currently with KFS to similarly develop the shea value chain. And let me emphasize that those are opportunities to directly support the many women and youth living in those countries that are deeply involved through as smallholder producers in both the harvesting and then development of products based on shea, in this case, all the way to the products that you buy in your beauty shops in developed countries. And my final slide, in conclusion, yes, the Glasgow COP26 Declaration on Forest and Land Use was potentially the most important and most promising high-level declaration and is expected to increase financial flows to sustainable forest management. And I hope to have shown you that there are many innovative financial mechanisms that are available to forest countries, many of which are still quite new but promising. There are many high potential ones, whether it's green bonds or Article 6 carbon credits or debt for nature swaps, that I think are an array of tools that governments can use in their toolkit to make projects that are bankable, funded through forms of private and public concessional finance. Our view is that the best way of funding such projects would be through some form of blended finance, where concessional finance is used to leverage private sector investments. I thank you for your attention and give it back to the moderator.
Thank you very much indeed to Dr. Rees-Berman. Perhaps that's a little bit more progress than some of us feared was in the offing. Well, that sets us off on a good foot. And now to the panel, if I may. My first question is to Minister Che of the Korea Forest Service. May I ask, sir, how Korea is making forests central to your development and financial policy agenda?
네, 여러분 반갑습니다.
Pleased to meet you. I hope you had a good night's sleep in Korea last night. As have been introduced, I am Choi Byung-am, Minister of Korea Forestry Service. Thank you very much for your participation at the Ministerial Forum on Forest Finance. Welcome to the ministers and vice ministers of Forestry and Environment and Secretary Generals of GCF and GGGI. Thank you for your participation. The value and importance in responding to climate change is so clear that it doesn't need to be emphasized any longer. In particular, ever since the adoption of the 2015 Paris Agreement, until COP26, the role of forestry continued to be emphasized even more. Forestry is the only carbon sink, and it has the potential of decreasing the emission of carbon by 5 to 6 billion tons by 2050. The land use change and forestry field has one of the highest potential for reducing carbon emissions along with renewable energy. And therefore, without sustainable utilization and conservation of forestry, we cannot achieve our climate change goals. Despite this fact, we have not been able to quantify the market value of carbon sinks, and therefore forestry has been under-evaluated within the economic system. This is not only true for Korea, but also around the world. I would like to touch upon this trend of under-evaluation and talk about some solutions. Currently, in many countries, they try to change forestry into farmland to expand agricultural productivity. We also continue to see illegal lumbering and reckless deforestation, which all lead to exploitative agro and forestry, and that has actually temporarily led to the increase in GDP. But in that process, the redirection and destruction of forestry and land has led to the permanent destruction of nature, which translates into disasters as well as the decrease in ecosystem services. Such market values have not been considered fully. How can we accelerate the mainstreaming of forestry? We must first not only take a look at the economic value that can be transferred in the market, but also the value of public good produced by forestry. And in order to do so, we need the quantification of the value of public goods produced by forestry. In Korea, 63% of our territory is covered by forestry, and we believe that when we quantify the public good created by forestry, it equals to $170 billion in 2018. We have quantified such figures since 1987. And $170 billion is equal to over 30 times the actual economic production of forestry, which stands at $5.5 billion per year. And so, by quantifying the economic value of public goods produced by forestry, we will be able to emphasize the importance of forestry to the financial authorities. And we were able to secure finances for forestry in Korea by quantifying this value. Quite fortunately, there has been heightened recognition around the world concerning the value of forestry. The economic, environmental, and social benefits from ecosystems, including forestry, have come into the limelight. And so, we have started to emphasize the importance of financing to prevent the destruction of forestry. I believe that this is very encouraging. However, I do believe that simple quantification for just financing is not enough. We need to take this a step further. We need to make sure that the values that are not transferred in the market are also included within the market. We need to have economic tools and instruments to enable the transfer of such values. A prime example is REDD+, which is a system to transfer carbon. The values that are not transferred within the market not only include carbon, but also the production of oxygen, air purification, soil conservation, the maintenance of ecosystems, disaster prevention, as well as aesthetic and psychological value. So there are so many values that are produced by forestry. How are we going to quantify and make them transferable within the market is very important. For example, this is something that is being researched in Korea. In preserving and fostering forest, we can give credits, and for those who wish to use forestry for other purposes will then need to purchase these credits. So this is a system that we are researching currently. So there are services provided by forests that are not transferable currently in the market, but if we can make them transferable in the market, that is the definition of forestry mainstreaming.
Thank you for that, Minister Che, and thank you for your leadership. Minister Matondo of Congo-Brazzaville, you come from a significant forest country. Can I ask you, Excellency, a similar question? How is Congo putting forests at the heart of your development agenda?
Merci infiniment. Encore une fois, j'aimerais.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude for the invitation so that we could come all the way to this Congress. I'm going to talk about the situation in Congo and also the Congo Basin area. We all understand that forests are critical in our responses to climate change. And in Glasgow, 144 countries signed up to the Declaration on Land Use and Forest Conservation. And we all are trying to respond to climate change by conserving and managing our forests. And we have 23 million hectares of forests, and it covers 69% of the total territory. And the deforestation rate is only 0.6%. And in the Congo Basin, it has the world's second largest forest cover. But there are rising concerns about this area. And I enjoyed the presentation by GGGI. And in that presentation, I was able to see where finances are coming from and where such financial resources are flowing into. But not a lot of funds are coming into Africa, and especially in the Congo Basin region, we lack funding. In this area, I believe this area is critical to preserving biodiversity. In the Republic of Congo, we've been investing in reforestation for more than 20 years, and we have successfully restored 8 million hectares of forests. And half of them have been reforested for production as well. And we have applied very strict guidelines and rules. We have a standard called FSC. In addition, we have been expanding the conservation areas. We have 7 conservation areas in particular. So it shows that the Republic of Congo has been working hard for many years. The deforestation rate is not 0.6%, but 0.06%, so it's very low. Also, when we take a look at the production capacity of our forests, it's 9 million cubic meters, and the utilization is only 2 million cubic meters. So we have a low level of utilization. So we wish to expand our forests by additional 1 million hectares. And at the national level, we have established a RED Plus plan. And we have an initiative called Coffee in Central Africa. I would like to express my gratitude to fund providers for this initiative. As for this coffee fund, this is actually the first international fund that we received. And in addition to such official contribution, there were many voluntary contributions coming from all parts of the world, including the EU. We've been benefiting from such financial contributions since 2009. And we have been working hard to build a stronger forest governance system. Together with EU, we have created a mechanism to better manage our forests. We've been gathering data, and we've also been implementing a monitoring mechanism. And by utilizing these mechanisms, we've been able to accumulate a large amount of data, and we're going to continue to do so. Moving on to the RED Plus strategy, we have been receiving about $1 million, and this has been used for various purposes. In addition, coffee is another source of funds to carry out various projects. As you can see, the international community has been providing finance to our initiatives in the Republic of Congo, so thank you very much. And in 2020, we created a new law on forest management. And as for Central African countries, we have been working on legislative efforts to preserve our forests. So these are some of the examples of the activities that we've been carrying out in the Republic of Congo. Of course, these initiatives have been challenging. We always suffer from lack of finance, but the Congo Basin is an important area, and we are committed. And with this strong commitment and will, I believe our initiatives can produce successful outcomes. We look forward to continuous support from the international community. So when it comes to financing forest management, especially reforestation and forest conservation, are critical, and it is also important to take stock of your forest resources. Only then you can understand the impact of forests on the environment, and we will also be able to improve the quality of timber and forestry products by utilizing such data. And we will continue to cultivate our forests, and we wish to increase carbon capture and carbon absorption capacity. We will utilize new technologies and new tools so that our forests can be utilized in a legal and fair and sustainable manner. I believe that the international community has to step up its efforts, and also countries need to provide more financial resources to developing countries, especially countries in Africa. We need more finance. So what we want is a more targeted and customized finance mechanism that is tailored to our needs. And the mechanism has to be effective and transparent so that the fund providers and the fund receiving countries can maintain transparency in utilizing these financial resources. And in Africa, these African countries have a fairly good governance system, but we need to further strengthen the governance, and to do so we need more financial resources, and we're going to make efforts to improve our financing mechanisms, and these efforts will lead to further alleviation of poverty, because many people in Africa are reliant on forests and their services for their livelihoods. We're faced with numerous challenges, but the key issue here is that there are many financial resources out there, but where are they going into and where are they being used? And we have to ask these important questions. So I'd like to urge the global community to work with African countries so that we can achieve the goal of preserving and conserving forests in Africa and preventing their degradation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you, Minister Matondo, and thank you for your leadership. Mr. Amaro, Secretary Amaro, and of course, You are the Assistant Secretary of the Department of the Environment and Natural Resources, not, as I misspoke, the Department of the Environment and Tourism. Mr. Amaro, the Philippines has recognized the importance of forests in your development agenda. How, a little more specifically, are you developing financial instruments that recognize that importance?
Thank you, James. Pleasant good morning to everyone. Let me first congratulate all the organizers for this very successful event and, of course, this Ministerial Forum. The Philippines, I guess, is a country of many islands with a total area of 30 million hectares. We have legally classified forest lands at 53%, but our forest cover only stands at 23%. And also, the forests are also found beyond forest lands. So basically, we may have lesser forests inside forest lands. But because of these disasters that regularly hit the country, there was this serious examination and perhaps review of our development directions. And I guess in the end, forest was realized to be at the central in terms of the solution to us surviving these regular typhoons that hit us numbering on the average 20 per year. So let me just provide for the regular processes that are being carried out in the country. So forestry sector or forestry development in particular is guided by forestry master plans. So the current Philippine Master Plan for Climate Resilient Forestry Development is the third since 1990, and it covers 2016 to 2028. Simply called Forestry Master Plan, its agenda is to realize our vision of sustainably managed watersheds and forest ecosystems that provide environmental and ecological benefits to our people. The goals include placing our forest lands under appropriate management arrangements, organization of multi-sectoral governance structures and processes, sustainable management of watersheds and forests, and climate-resilient forest-dependent communities. The Forestry Master Plan is mirrored in the Philippine Development Plan, or PDP as we call it, and for 2017 to 2018, it is in a particular chapter, a standalone chapter on ensuring ecological integrity, clean and healthy environment. The PDP corresponds to the 6-year term of presidential administrations. However, the present plan, the version is the first medium-term plan anchored on a national long-term vision. We call it Ambition Natin, or our ambition, up to 2040. This seeks to lay a strong foundation for more inclusive growth, high trust and resilient society, and a globally competitive knowledge economy. This plan, the Philippine Development Plan, in turn is supported by a corresponding Philippine Investment Plan. So these both plans guide the Philippine Congress in appropriating budgets for our annual budgets for our priority programs and projects. So reforestation and forest restoration or rehabilitation, coupled with forest protection, are priority programs in the Philippine Master Plans as well as the Philippine Development Plans, and therefore provided with regular funding support by the government. Our National Greening Program, initially designed to cover only up to 2015, is now running for 11 years since 2011. Total budget provided is 54.6 billion pesos, or equivalent to over $1 billion US. Over 2.17 million hectares were planted, to 1.8 billion trees for timber production and agroforestry, including high-value crops as coffee, cacao, and rubber, bamboo and rattan, and mangroves. jobs generated, particularly for the upland and coastal communities, which we consider as the marginal sector in our society, total about 5.8 million. On the other hand, our anti-illegal logging and forest protection program was supported with a budget of 8.4 billion pesos or $16.8 million dollars over the same period. And this now use an app-based mobile system augmented by the deployment of drones, resulting to a significant reduction to our illegal logging hotspots from 197 in 2010 to just 19 last year, or a reduction of 90%. So basically, as of the moment, the funding support for the priority programs is through the Philippine government's budget. However, we were fortunate also to benefit from ODAs, particularly from JICA, from the Asian Development Bank, from IFAD, over the same period also in the rehabilitation of degraded ecosystems or forest lands and watersheds. And this total $288 million US dollars, where an additional of over 115,000 hectares were rehabilitated. People's organizations strengthened, numbering around 632, and basic infrastructure support provided under this project. So basically, while we are right now very much dependent on our national budget, we are also one with the international community in trying to catch up to avail of these developments, such as in the RED Plus. We have to declare that as of the moment, we are still in the readiness phase. So, but I guess let me end this sharing that right now is the midterm of the current master plan, and in time for the change in our administration. So we now can have this opportunity to rechart our direction and perhaps also leverage with other financial arrangements so that we would be covering the remaining areas that need to be rehabilitated for us to be more or less climate resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary Amaro, and thank you for your leadership. Thank you to all our three panelists. I think we've got off to a very good start, a very good first half of our program. If I could now call on our first panelist to leave the stage, and at the same time, could I ask our second panel to come forwards, please? And we'll have something of a video while we do that, I think. Thank you.
Our growth makes forests fall. Yet we need forests for a livable future. Forests play a critical role in achieving global adaptation and mitigation goals. But to do so, forests need to grow. Restoring and conserving our green frontiers can help us get back on track to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, while also unlocking opportunities for a sustainable COVID-19 recovery. Financing forest action is more crucial than ever. We need to invest in forests to address the climate crisis. The Green Climate Fund scales up financing and catalyses investment for sustainable forest management and conservation. Enabling environments are needed for developing countries to take forest action. GCF supports developing countries in the implementation of RED+, which can mainstream the role of forests into climate-resilient development planning processes and ensure benefits for indigenous peoples. Barriers to forest investments must be addressed to allow transformative action to take place. GCF is supporting countries like Bhutan by closing the short-term public finance gap for forest protection, allowing them to restructure their forest governance and management systems in the long term while helping drive innovative nature-based approaches and creation of green markets. Mobilization of private sector financing is also needed. GCF crowds in private finance in the forest sector and stimulates the markets for sustainably harvested and processed forest products. GCF leverages public funds to de-risk equity investments, such as through the Arboro Fund. Strengthening the capacity of domestic financial institutions is key. Through programs like the Inclusive Green Financing Initiative for the Great Green Wall, GCF will support the greening of Africa's financial sector in order to nurture innovative forest and climate strategies. Nurturing forest-friendly economies now will lead us to a livable tomorrow. Because when forests grow, we flourish.
Very good. Well, that's a nice little kick-off for our next keynote by Mr. Yannick Glemarek, who's the Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. Just before we do hear from him, let me briefly introduce our second panelists. We have the Vice Minister of Environment from Ecuador, Bianca Daga Jervis, welcome. Mr. Lee White, who's the Minister of Water, Forest, the Sea and Environment from Gabon, welcome to the stage. And to his left, we have the Secretary of Forests and Environment from Nepal, Mr. Pem Narayan Kandel. Welcome. But before we get to that panel, indeed, let's hear from Mr. Glemarek of the Green Climate Fund. Thank you, sir.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and dear friends, on behalf of the Green Climate Fund, it's a pleasure to be invited to say a few introductory remarks to set up the stage for this session on how to address the financing gap for forest. The Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forest and Land Use, where leaders from 141 countries committed to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030 through conservation and restoration of forests and other terrestrial ecosystems, is supported by the Global Forests Finance Pledge, whereby 11 countries committed to providing $12 billion for forest-related climate finance between 2021 and 2025. These funds will need to be used in a highly catalytic manner to shift much larger public and private financial flows to achieve the Glasgow Declaration on Forest and Land Use. The financing needs to fully deploy forest-based solutions to avert catastrophic climate change, reduce biodiversity losses and ecosystem degradation, foster a green, climate-resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and achieve the SDGs are estimated at about $200 billion annually. The previous section has highlighted the importance of incorporating forests into development and financial policy agendas. This cannot be overstated. Despite the risk posed by climate change and the destruction of forests, an analysis of the $783 billion of sovereign bonds issued in 2020 and maturing in 30, 50, 100 years found that 3/4 did not disclose any climate or nature-related risk. Mainstreaming forests into national and subnational development strategies and financial policies will not only prevent that public money be inadvertently invested into activities driving deforestation, but will also reduce the total financial needs to achieve the SDGs. According to some estimates, integrating development and climate policies could reduce the overall infrastructure financing needs by up to 40%. Through its grant-based readiness program, GCF can support developing countries in these efforts. I had the pleasure to discuss yesterday with His Excellency, the Minister of Environment and Tourism from Mongolia, a GCF readiness program signed last Friday to assist the government of Mongolia in reviewing its 800 laws and 4,000 orders to address legal gaps and optimize synergies across the entire legal framework of the country. This readiness program will be implemented with the support of GGGI and my good friend Frank, who spoke earlier. The $68 million project implemented by GIZ and co-financed by GCF in Lao PDR builds on such a review of the forest legal and regulatory framework to mainstream forests into climate-resilient development planning processes at national and local level, and to encourage deforestation-free agriculture and agroforestry by enhancing agricultural productivity. What else should we do to effectively bridge the financing gap for forest protection, restoration, and sustainable management? There are literally hundreds of innovative financing mechanisms that could be described. Frank went through a number of them, and this could prove extremely confusing because they tend to be context-specific and do not apply to all countries and all thematics allied. But most of these instruments have two key objectives. The first one is to create new asset classes. And the second one is to create new climate and nature markets. And I will discuss in turn each of these two types of objectives. Turning first to new asset classes, green, social, sustainability, and sustainability-linked bonds represent a new asset class that has gained traction over the past years across developed markets. Even though green bonds grew by $600 billion in 2021, they still represent just a fraction of the bond market. The growth potential is immense. However, and there is always a however when we discuss something like that, the size of this market remains limited in developed countries. In developing countries, for example, Africa accounted for only 0.077% of the global green bond markets in 2021, echoing what was said by the minister from the Congo-Brazzaville. It's often those who need the most resources who have the least access to resources. The adequate market infrastructure are needed to provide the foundation for capital markets depth and liquidity, and give a fighting chance to be able to issue such kind of green bonds. These include exchanges and trading platforms, clearing houses, credit risk assessment, custodian and fiduciaries, and developing the capacity of local public development and commercial banks to issue green bonds. But the potential of green social sustainability-linked bonds to help fill the SDG financing gap is significant. I mentioned in my remark during the first section of the high-level panel yesterday, the $600 million Amazon Bioeconomy Fund, co-financed by GCF and implemented by the Inter-American Development Bank in 6 Amazon countries to support eco-businesses in the Amazon. This, in addition to the direct resources of GCF and the Inter-American Development Bank, this initiative includes an advisory service component on how to effectively include bio-businesses into thematic bonds issuance, as well as how to deploy credit enhancement guarantees for green bonds issued by public entities. The ambition of the Amazon Fund is to create a new asset class for eco-businesses led by local communities to foster the protection and sustainable development of the Amazon region. When I'm speaking about asset classes, I might be using a vocabulary that might come across as esoteric for a few of our participants. Let's mean in plain language, what does it mean creating a new asset class for eco-businesses in the Amazon? What this means is that it's not only for institutional investors that this will be regarded as a legitimate investment to allocate resources to investment in eco-businesses in the Amazon. It means for individuals, for small savers like you and I, when we go to see our banker, we will be able to tell our banker, I want 5% of my savings to be invested in eco-businesses in the Amazon, led by communities. That's what it is when you create a new asset class. When you create a new asset class, you truly leverage tens and tens and tens of billions. It's a wonderful instrument to be able to shift flows at scale. So that was one example of these new asset classes. Now let me turn to nature and carbon markets. And here, nature and climate markets. And here I would like to focus on the carbon market, a point that has been mentioned several times already this morning and yesterday. The forest carbon credit often fetch higher prices in markets because of the range of co-benefits they provide, starting with adaptation and sustainable development. REDD+ carbon credits have been soaring with a growth of 280% in September 2021, year on year, showing the strong interest among voluntary buyers for REDD+ credit. In response to the mandate given by the UNFCCC, GCF has been supporting since its inception all three phases of REDD+ to create a robust market for high-quality carbon credit in terms of both environmental integrity and development co-benefits. The GCF has financed over $12 million for phase one of readiness, Phase two has financed $145 million for phase two implementation, and the GCF was the world's first provider of result-based payment with a total of $497 million disbursed and under implementation. Our objective was to basically kick off the market of REDD+ by being the first buyer. The GCF REDD+ result payment pilot program is being used as a stepping stone by some countries to lay the basis for generating high standard carbon credit that could be traded on markets, but also through the LEAF coalition. For example, Costa Rica reinvested some of its proceeds from the GCF REDD+ result-based payments into a system to document the transfer of rights to the revenue from carbon transaction from landowners, notably indigenous communities. This is an important step in accessing private finance for emission reduction. The adoption of the rules of Article 6 in Glasgow last year opens new opportunities for countries to leverage carbon markets to avert catastrophic climate change, restore ecosystem, protect biodiversity, and finance the SDGs. These opportunities do not only apply to terrestrial ecosystem, but also to blue carbon, coastal and marine ecosystem. Blue carbon, which include mangrove, has largely been left out of NDCs. And let's be open, neglected in policy making. Despite the critical importance of coastal and marine ecosystem to mitigate and adapt the impact of climate change and preserve the livelihoods of over 500 million people across the globe. Blue carbon, generated by mangrove restoration, have the potential to deliver high-quality carbon credits that could fetch higher prices, thanks to exceptional carbon storage potential and the multiplicity of co-benefits, adaptation, livelihood, food security that they provide. GCF is currently exploring with its partner a series of initiatives to deepen blue carbon markets. In its effort to leverage new financing mechanisms to close the climate and nature financing gaps, GCF places a strong emphasis on co-benefits and safeguards and the rigorous vetting processes leading to project approval. This ensures that GCF finance is consistently aligned not only with mitigation and adaptation objectives, but also with the Sustainable Development Goals, and that GCF finance delivers benefits to all, including indigenous people and local communities. We look forward to the insight of this section and to further working with our partners on these new financing opportunities to build a green, healthy, and resilient future with forests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Monsieur Glamarek. Vice Minister Daga, Ecuador made really one of the most bold statements when it said, okay, we have this oil resource, we will not develop the resource if you compensate us for it. And of course, the compensation didn't arrive. I wonder if you could speak to that example, or generally to the challenges that your country has faced in trying to access finance for climate purposes.
¿Me escuchan? Ahí, perfecto. Lo primero, muchísimas gracias por...
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation to this panel. Thank you to the Korean government, GGGI, GCF, and FAO for this invitation. Thank you for the question. As you have mentioned, Ecuador is only emitting 0.18% of the carbon emitted around the world, but we are very vulnerable to climate change. And by 2025, we have declared that we will reduce emissions by 20%. And we hope to lead result-based payment along with Germany and Norway. Through a 20-year contract, we hope to support the micro farmers as well as the indigenous people of the Amazon. We also hope to work through new mechanisms such as LEAF. The forests in Ecuador are primary, and 50% of that is in the Amazon. We are also hoping to achieve net zero. We have already declared our goal of net zero. We hope to achieve sustainable utilization of primary forest. It may sound like we are trying to achieve a utopia, but we believe that it is quite feasible, and we are very proud of this plan. And we believe that by utilizing agroforestry, we could export our cacao to Europe. I believe that we are probably the first nation to achieve this result. And so on the government level, we hope to guarantee through a accreditation system to have sustainable utilization of forests. And this is a result that we have achieved through long-term efforts. Our green efforts are definitely pro-growth. As you have mentioned, resources from around the world are not reaching the necessary target. And so, in Colombia, we have had national tasks and projects. I would like to talk about three things. And so, when all projects are implemented, they have to be aligned with the national agenda. So the financing for different countries should be linked and aligned with national indexes. And second is speed. All government projects and programs in Ecuador must be implemented according to the timeline that has been established for the project itself. And third is to have fair negotiations and conditions. In particular, our efforts for forest conservation have not been well recognized around the world, and the value of forests as well as the hydrological cycles of the forests have not received adequate recognition. This also includes the value of the local community and the indigenous people. And so taking all of this into consideration, we need to receive compensation based on result-based payment. A country like Ecuador definitely is worth its value because of our forest as well as our natural resources. We have abundant resources. This includes minerals and oil, but if we develop while destroying our environment, this is not something that we can accept. So we need to be recognized for the benefits that we are giving up. Therefore, we need to find greener and innovative ways of development. That is why we made that particular decision. We are a middle power, and our economy is not large. But despite this fact, we have made the decision to make sure that we do not destroy the environment in conducting agroforestry. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice Minister Dagger. Minister White, what does Gabon need in terms of climate forest finance, and what is it managing to access?
That's a big question. We actually turned our back on REDD+ and what people are calling climate finance some 10 years ago. We're a country that's 88% rainforest. For 3 decades, through strong government policies, we've maintained our deforestation very low, rather like Congo. Over the last decade, since Copenhagen, we've absorbed net 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So, we're beyond carbon neutral. We're one of 10 or so carbon positive countries that are absorbing more carbon than we emit. Over the last decade, we've increased that net absorption. So we've become even more net positive by about 100 million tons. And we did do a deal with Norway a few years ago for $150 million of basically aid money in proportion to carbon reductions. Aid money with a lot of strings attached to it. It's not really finance, it's sort of money to accompany us. But when I say we turned our back on REDD+, I was in the room, as you said in your introductory comments, I was in the room when developed nations promised $30 billion for Fast Start, REDD over 3 years. REDD was meant to be this transition, this Prince Charles sold it as the emergency transition from deforestation to stabilizing forests. By now, it should have changed its name. It shouldn't be called reducing emissions anymore. It should be called reversing emissions, because it was meant to transition to stabilizing forests. That 30 billion never materialized. Maybe in 10 years, we've spent 2 billion, not 30 billion in 3 years. So what Gabon did was we looked at the situation in Gabon, and we developed a national development strategy that would preserve our rainforest. As in Congo, we're, I guess, very lucky. You can do carbon positive forestry. When we do selective logging, when we cut 2 trees per hectare every 25 years on a rotation, you end up with more carbon in your logged forest than your unlogged forest. So you can actually exploit the forest to increase carbon stocks and to preserve the rainforest. We banned the export of logs. Gabon, for over a century, exported logs to the developed world. The first logs were sent in 1889 to Hamburg in Germany. And when you export a log from the Congo Basin, you retain 8% of the value by our calculations, 8%. So it's 8% for Gabon, 92% for whoever's buying the logs. 8% of the job, so 1 job for Gabon, 9 jobs for the country importing the logs. So simply by banning, I say simply, but we'll come to that, simply by banning the export of logs and transforming the logs into furniture, into parquet, into windows and doors and so on, you multiply your forest economy times 10. And critically for Africa, where our population is young, you multiply your jobs, your forest jobs, by 10. You create a constituency of Gabonese people whose livelihoods depend on sustainable forest management and timber transformation. And so the Gabonese people become vested in sensible, sound management of the rainforest. And if you're going to make that transition, what you need is investment. You need private sector investment, perhaps well-motivated, well-meaning private sector investment, but if the government has the right policies and is strong, you can control that. What we need is private sector investment in sound forest management, but particularly in transformation of wood into high-value products. And if we get investment in timber transformation, we can literally log the forest to save the forest, exploit the forest sustainably to save the rainforest. When you exploit the forest, you do change it somewhat. So we're heading for 30% protected areas as an insurance policy. So what we really want is investment. We don't want, our hand is not extended. We're not begging. We've made, we probably are the most carbon positive country on earth today because of 3 decades of investment in sound forest management. But we want to go further. We need to multiply our production of third and second, third, fourth level transformation products over the next decade. And we believe strongly that we can multiply. We can go from 30,000 jobs in Gabon to 300,000 jobs. We can go from a $1 billion timber industry to $10 billion industry, and at the same time increase carbon stocks. And so what we're looking for is not small REDD+ payments. We're looking for substantial investment in a sustainable forest economy.
Thank you very much. Could you, quick follow-up question or two, could you spell out for us why you decided not to pursue REDD+? I mean, it looks like a pretty enlightened decision in retrospect, but why at the time did you make that decision, and how do you reflect upon it now?
The political thinking was, and it came from our head of state, from Ali Bongo, there's no future, no easy future for the world without the Congo Basin standing. We have 8 years of global emissions locked up in the Congo Basin. If we send those carbon stocks into the atmosphere, then we've lost the fight for 1.52 degrees. And for a country that's 88% forested, our entire development is linked to how we manage the forest. Are we going to go the way of many of the West African countries and replace our forest with farming? Or are we going to maintain the forest? Well, we don't really have a choice, because if we do cut the forest down, the world loses the fight against climate change. If we cut the forest down, the Sahel, we're talking about the green wall of the Sahel, well, the Gabonese and the Congolese forests are generating the rainfall in the Sahel. So if we cut our forests down, we're looking at hundreds of millions of climate refugees moving around Africa. The Congo Basin forests are feeding rainfall into the Blue Nile. So we're actually partly responsible for irrigating Egypt. You lose the Congo Basin rainforest, you lose agriculture in Egypt. What's the economic cost of that? The tens, the hundreds of millions of climate refugees we're going to see. So we decided we had no choice. In terms of the stability of our country into the future, we have to keep the Congo Basin forest standing. And we could not gamble the future of our forests on the voluntary contributions coming from developed nations, because we've seen in the UNFCCC over the years that these voluntary contributions tend not to be delivered upon. So we had to find a local economic mechanism to maintain the forests, and that's what we've done. The sustainable harvest of timber and transforming it into high-value products. We just signed a contract to start making guitars out of oven-coal trees in Gabon. So fourth-level transformation, highly skilled jobs, so rewarding jobs for our people, and high-value products. And we multiply the value of the timber by a factor of somewhere between 20 and 30 times when you put it into a guitar that's sold on the international market. And so it was because, A, we had no choice other than to maintain the forests, and B, there's no way we could gamble on there's international handouts basically through RED. Forest carbon credits, as we head towards carbon neutrality, should be real. A country that's net absorbing 100 million tons of carbon dioxide every year should be able to realize value from that, because that's the only way we're going to get to net zero into the future. But even if we were being paid $10 a ton for our $100 million of net sequestration, that's only $1 billion. We're aiming for a $10 billion forest industry. And how do we create 300,000 jobs watching the trees grow or measuring the trees to see what the carbon stocks are? We can't give jobs to the people of the Congo Basin through RED Plus payments. And so it has to be a mix. I think RED Plus we should forget about. We should look towards carbon sequestration, ITMOs, for sure, in a sort of a new carbon world. But we don't see any alternative to a mix. Carbon credits might be useful. They might be an addition, but sustainable management of the forests is really the way to go if you're going to create jobs, livelihoods, and maintain the forest.
One more, if you'll permit me. When there has been such a lack of progress, what you've been doing in Gabon has been quite inspiring to lots of us. But you have quite unusual circumstances. You have a lot of forests, you have a relatively small population, you have stable government, and you have other sources of revenue. How replicable do you think, say in Africa or more or globally, do you think your progress has been?
When you say we have other sources of revenue, we have oil. But because the developed world has filled the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, that oil economy will disappear. And so in 10, 15 years' time, we probably won't be selling oil anymore. And so we've got an adaptation challenge, which is how do we replace 60% of our economy that's going to disappear because of climate change. And so again, this forest economy is our way of sort of premeditated way of starting to adapt to the economic impacts of climate change. I think for Congo Basin, certainly for Congo, Congo is almost as carbon positive as Gabon. You can almost interchange Republic of Congo with Gabon. In DRC, the population numbers are higher and the pressure is higher and deforestation is starting. But if there was a real forest economy in DRC, I think we can turn that around. So I think it's a model that works for Congo Basin. I think for the West African forests, we're looking much more at restoration. And I think their carbon could really play a role because we need to start growing the forests back in order to get ecosystem services back, to start the rivers flowing again and so on. And so some form of carbon market which is accessible, because currently it's not. There are so many what we call safeguards. The world is so paranoid that countries like Gabon, where supposedly our democracy is weak and you can't trust the permanence of our carbon credits, and therefore there are so many hurdles you have to jump through that it's almost impossible to actually sell any carbon. We have to get beyond that and get to a system where real carbon gains are rewarded sensibly. If we did that, I think a somewhat modified version of what we're doing in Gabon could work for the West African forests. And we really need to do it quickly, given the state of the atmosphere.
Thank you very much indeed for all of that. Secretary Kandel, Nepal has been actively looking for forest climate finance through a variety of means, through FCPF, through FIP, through GCF, more recently through the LEAF coalition, through the whole alphabet soup. What has been your experience, and how frustrated are you, I should say?
Thank you. Good morning. Excellencies, ministers, FAO officials, GCF representative, participant, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Secretariat of 15th World Forestry Congress, FAO and Korea Forest Service, for inviting Nepal in participating 15th World Forest Congress and giving responsibility as the panelist in this important forum. I have few delegation from Nepal. Maybe I would like to them to stand up. My colleagues are there. 5, 6 people are coming from a small country, and they are also here contributing for World Forestry Congress. So they are my participants. Thank you very much. As you know, that Nepal is a small country in between two giants, China and India. Mountainous, most vulnerable country of climate change, thus need dense and proportionately distributed forest cover to keep up the fragile landscape. So this is very important for Nepal, that we must have very dense and proportionately distributed forest to keep up our very fragile landscape. The latest land use map reveals that forest and other wooded land comprises nearly 45% of the country and the largest land cover of Nepal. Provided multiple environmental goods and services, as I mentioned, support for socioeconomic resilience by providing forest product, food and water security, reduce physical risks due to flood control, ecosystem health, and mitigate greenhouse gas emission through carbon sequestration. So forest in Nepal is very important for its multiple function. It is also important to note that more than about 24% area is covered by protected area system to conserve representative biodiversity and ecosystem of the country. So we have very huge network of protected area system over the country. Forestry sector substantially contribute climate change mitigation and adaptation, biodiversity conservation, and livelihood enhancement. However, policymaker, planner, and private sector have blamed that despite the largest land cover, contribution of forest in revenue generation, employment generation, and also GDP is negligible. So this is the blame that private sector, even the policymaker, higher official blame us that. Therefore, it is very important to us to mobilize these huge resources for the people, for the climate change mitigation and adaptation as well. The reason of this is that because environmental service that forests provided have not been wisely accounted yet. So this is the right time that we have to think to account our forest service, that forest provide the environmental service. So that is very important for Nepal as well. But national development policy and plan have been identified forestry as one of the foundation of economic development. Forestry for prosperity is our development goal. We like to mobilize these resources sustainably for the development of the country, for the economic development of the country, to keep up the fragile mountain landscape of Nepal. So this is very important for Nepal. Nepal is one of the, as you know, that Nepal is one of the signatory of Glasgow Forest Declaration. Our Right Honorable Prime Minister participated the Leaders Summit and signed the pledge. In addition to that, in Glasgow COP26, Nepal made 3 important announcements I would like to share in this important forum. Nepal would like to reach net zero emission by 2045, little bit earlier than the global target, because Nepal emit very less greenhouse gases, and we would like to transform our energy system through, to clean energy, because we have very high potentiality of hydropower and renewable energy. So this is important that Nepal's development path will be climate resilient development, green, resilient and inclusive development, because this is the development path of Nepal. We need to develop our country economically, we need to develop our country and also keep up the fragile landscape. So therefore we have to think on that way. So our target is to reach net zero emission by 2045. Halt and reverse deforestation and degradation and maintain 45% forest land through sustainable forest management. So sustainable forest management is the key approach that facilitates to reverse the deforestation and land degradation. Also increase the green job, employment and revenue. So that is another announcement that we made in Glasgow COP26. And another important announcement is National Adaptation Plan. Implementation of National Adaptation Plan effectively and efficiently to reduce the climate-induced disaster significantly. We like to build climate-resilient society because for us, climate adaptation, climate change adaptation is more important because country is very fragile. It is very difficult to us to conserve land and water, which are very fundamental natural resources of the earth. Therefore, implementation of National Adaptation Plan, which is in place, is very important for Nepal. For the country like Nepal, vulnerable country like Nepal, National Adaptation Plan implementation is very much important. As you asked that, to translate these all policy, plan, and strategy into ground, we do need a lot of capacity, resources. Huge resources is required to mobilize the forest resources, to conduct the sustainable forest management. So therefore, we are looking many funding sources, multilateral international funding sources, for example, Green Climate Fund. GCF support is gradually increasing in Nepal to build climate resilient into 2 watersheds. And on the energy sector, more projects are in pipeline for climate change mitigation and adaptation. We have support from the we have also the RED Plus program, and also entering the LEAP, lowering emission, accelerating forest financing. So we are entering in that mechanism. So we are preparing for that. We have also his support from the government of United Kingdom and also United States in climate change and energy sector. You might listen that MCC, which is very important for our country. I mentioned that the development path of Nepal is climate resilient development. Then we need to promote the clean energy, hydropower energy, which is very high potentiality in Nepal, and also to reduce the trade deficit, because we have to import fossil fuel from India. So that is why in Nepal there is big, trade deficit. So we have a lot of potentiality of hydropower, and that MCC Millennium Challenge Cooperation helps to, construct the transmission line and also increase the accessibility for the people to access on hydroelectricity. So those are the areas that international community, bilateral cooperation, multilateral cooperation are supporting for the development of Nepal, for the sustainable forest management of Nepal. So we need even more resources for national adaptation plan, to implement the national adaptation plan. That is what we are looking for. That is what we need for Nepal. So for that, Nepal is formulating climate finance strategy to guide financial approach. We are formulating, which is in very final stage, that could help to guide the, climate investment. Maybe other countries can also learn. And even I would like to suggest to FAO and other international community that let us formulate the separate forest finance strategy. Separate. Maybe it could be within that climate investment strategy, but if we are looking to prioritize the forest and forestry, we have to formulate the forest finance strategy that could guide to move forward. And second and most important recommendation, I would like to highlight that need to increase fund flow from various sources for sustainable forest management to reverse deforestation and increase green jobs, mitigating and adaptive capacity of the forest. So forest investment should be prioritized from all scale of investment. Multilateral financial mechanisms such as GCF for climate investment is doing good. I would like to thanks and congratulate for your work, but need more to prioritize forestry in financial strategy. So that is also very much important. Forestry and also adaptation, increasing grant fund flow for forest finance. Loan is little bit agitating because that forestry is very long gestation. It needs longer time to get the benefit. Therefore, most probably the grant money should flow. If loan very less rate of interest is another area we have to think. Private sector investment could be instrumental for result-based payment that you mentioned, and also Nepal is also looking for that. So we are talking with many private investors to invest in Nepal for plantation and other activities. So investment is required. Eventually, I would like to highlight that investment is required in sustainable forest management. That is the only strategy to reverse the deforestation and land degradation, and also increase the employment, green job, and also revenue for the country. That those policymakers and planners are blaming that forestry sector is not providing more revenue for the country. You are just talking for climate change, this and that. So revenue is important for the nation that they are asking. We have to prove that forestry sector can provide more revenue through its environmental product and services. So watershed management for a country like Nepal is very important because we need to protect our land and water, soil and water, which is very fundamental and foundation of the development and renewable energy. That is the area that Nepal is required in fund from international funding mechanism. I thank you for your passage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary Candela. I would very much like to stay with this panel, but we're out of time, unfortunately. So let me just say that we've lost a decade, clearly. The promises of a decade and more ago were not fulfilled, as we've discussed on this stage. We've lost a decade, but nonetheless, what I've got from this morning is nonetheless a sense of a climate finance ecosystem focused around natural capital and forests especially is just starting to take shape. I was encouraged to that effect, especially by the presentations we heard on the Global Green Growth Institute, the Green Climate Fund, but there's still a huge amount of detail to be worked out, and still, I think, a lot of questioning of the political commitment that lies behind this development. And with that in mind, it's fitting that I can call on a last speaker to close us out this morning, who is representing COP27, which will be held, of course, in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt later this year. He's Mr. Ali Abo Sena and is the director of the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency. Thank you, sir, and please come to the stage.
Thank you very much for inviting us for this very important session. And it's indeed very important to speak about the finance. And let me start first with the mandates that we have been brought from Galaxo meeting. There was some very special mandates related to finance. The first one related to start a program for collective finance. This is one that we will be working during the COP27. The other mandate related to doubling the adaptation finance, and this is a very important mandate. The third mandate is very important, also related to how we monitor the progress through a ministerial meeting every 2 years to review the achievement of the target and how it is really met or not. This is a very important mechanism. So during the COP27, the Egyptian presidency will be working very much and will be ensuring that all tasks and all decisions have been taken in Galaxo will be achieved and completed during the COP27. We are calling the COP27 as a call, or as a COP for implementation. It's a very important slogan that's very important for all the world to start on the ground and working on the ground. Related to the forests and how we can keep our global forests, as we call it, the green lungs for our world, it's a really very important topic. Forests are the main, one of the main items that can keep or can fight the climate change. So we have a very special target, how we can keep our forests, sustain them. This is why in Galaxo the world leaders have been agreed to launch a declaration on the forests and land use. This is a very ambitious and very important declaration that we have been taken from Galaxo, and there will be a special day for the ecosystems during the COP27 that countries can present their initiatives, their success stories, and this will be a good opportunity for all of us to discuss this. So as I mentioned that for COP27, financing issue is a very critical issue. The ambition is very high, especially from developing countries. They are looking forward for starting implementation at the ground, how we can deal with the forest issue. There is a need for development, a need to achieving a sustainable development at the ground, and at the same time would like also to work together with how we can fight the climate change. This is an issue, and we have to respect this especially for developing country. They would like to grow, they would like to achieve, as my colleague from Congo was speaking about, the basic needs for development and how we can increase the jobs and also contribute to the combating the climate change. This is something that we would like to highlight. So I have to refer to the Global Forest Finance Pledge, which have been mentioned by Yannick during his keynote. That is a very big target and big initiative, and we would like to bring it to the ground. And we believe that with additional support from different partners, we can enlarge this pledge and we can also work together. So I would say that during the COP27, financing issue will have a special attention. We would like to work on setting this type of programs for finance, monitoring, transparency for finance. This is a huge task. We are committed to bring it as an unbiased moderator for this COP27. And we are all in Egypt looking forward to see you, to share with you the knowledge, to sit together our targets, to start together implementation. So we hope to see you all during the COP27 in Egypt. And by the end, I would like to thank the Korean, the Republic of Korea for giving us this opportunity to be here. And looking forward to see you all in Egypt very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seddon. Thank you all. Thank you to all our panelists and speakers. That ends this morning's session.